My mom always had a way of making me feel small, even when I was soaring high. Growing up, I was never enough. My grades were never high enough, my clothes were never fashionable enough, and my dreams were never ambitious enough. "You'll amount to nothing without my guidance," she would say, shaking her head with disappointment. I believed her for the longest time. I was the shadow that followed her, the echo of her voice, the extension of her dreams. Everything I did was to please her, to prove my worth. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. When I met David in college, something changed. He saw me, really saw me, beyond my mother's shadow. He believed in me when no one else did. "You have fire in your eyes," he would say. "Don't let anyone extinguish it." With David's support, I started a small tech company from our garage. Days turned into nights as I worked tirelessly, fueled by passion and determination. My mother scoffed at my efforts. "Playing businesswoman now, are we?" she would say with that condescending smile of hers. "Don't come crying to me when it fails." But I didn't fail. Slowly but surely, my company grew. From a team of 2, just David and me, to a team of 10, then 50, then hundreds. We moved from our garage to a small office, then to a larger one, and finally to a sleek high-rise in downtown Manhattan. Through it all, my mother remained unimpressed. "It's just luck," she would say. "Or maybe your husband's doing. You've always been dependent on others." I stopped trying to prove myself to her. I had a company to run, employees who depended on me, and clients who valued my expertise. I was making a difference in the world, one innovation at a time. Last Sunday, my mother insisted on hosting a family brunch. "Everyone will be there," she said. "Don't embarrass me by not showing up." I agreed, despite David's concerns. "You don't have to go," he said, holding my hand. "You know how she gets." "I know," I replied, "but I'm not that scared little girl anymore." The brunch was at my mother's favorite restaurant, an upscale place with crystal chandeliers and waiters in bow ties. When David and I arrived, everyone was already seated. My aunt and uncle, my cousins with their spouses, and my mother at the head of the table, regal as ever in her pearl necklace and designer dress. "Ah, Elizabeth finally decides to grace us with her presence," my mother announced as we approached. "Too busy with that little project of yours to be on time?" I smiled tightly. "Hello, Mother." Traffic was bad. We took our seats, and the brunch proceeded as expected, my mother dominating the conversation, sharing stories that highlighted her achievements and subtly diminished everyone else's. I kept quiet, picking at my food, while David squeezed my hand under the table. Then my cousin Sarah asked about my company. "I heard you're expanding to Europe. That's incredible, Liz." Before I could respond, my mother let out a laugh, that shrill, cutting laugh that always made my stomach knot. "Oh, don't exaggerate. It's hardly incredible. Elizabeth has always had delusions of grandeur." The table fell silent. Sarah looked uncomfortable. I took a sip of water, trying to calm the storm brewing inside me. "Besides," my mother continued, louder now, her eyes fixed on me, "she's nothing without me. Who do you think paid for her college? Who introduced her to all the right people? Who taught her how to dress and speak properly?" She gestured at me dismissively. "Everything she is, everything she has, she owes to me." The words hung in the air like poison. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. The old Elizabeth would have lowered her head in shame, accepting the humiliation. But I wasn't that person anymore. I looked at my mother and smiled, not a tight, forced smile, but a genuine one. Because in that moment, I pitied her. She would never know the joy of watching someone you love spread their wings and soar. "You're right about one thing, Mother," I said calmly. "I wouldn't be who I am today without you. Your constant criticism taught me resilience. Your lack of support taught me self-reliance. And your disbelief in me fueled my determination to prove you wrong." My mother's face flushed with anger. "How dare you speak to me like that, after everything I've done for you?" That's when David reached into his coat pocket. Silently, he pulled out my company badge, the one with my photo and the title Elizabeth Carter, CEO, emblazoned beneath the logo of Carter Technologies, now valued at over 500 million. He placed it gently on the table, facing my mother. "She built this," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "From nothing. With her own hands, her own mind, her own heart. No connections, no handouts, just pure grit and brilliance." My mother stared at the badge, her expression shifting from anger to disbelief. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. "And for the record," David continued, "she's been invited to speak at next month's Global Tech Summit, an honor reserved for the most innovative minds in the industry. So perhaps, Mrs. Carter, you might consider revising your assessment of your daughter's worth." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face had turned pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She reached for her water glass, but her hand trembled so much that she nearly knocked it over. My aunt was the first to break the silence. "Is that true, Elizabeth? You're speaking at the Global Tech Summit?" I nodded, suddenly feeling a strange mix of pride and sadness. "Yes. Our new AI integration platform caught their attention. They want me to talk about ethical innovation." "Jay, that's impressive," my uncle admitted, looking at me with newfound respect. My cousin Sarah beamed. "I always knew you were special, Liz. Even in high school when you built that program for the science fair, remember? Everyone else had volcanoes and solar systems, and you created software that could predict weather patterns." I smiled at the memory. That program was full of bugs. It predicted snow in July. "Still," Sarah insisted, "it was incredible for a 16-year-old. And as the conversation shifted to my company's achievements, I noticed my mother becoming smaller in her chair, her posture deflating with each word of praise directed at me. For the first time in my life, I saw vulnerability in her eyes, fear perhaps, or regret. When dessert arrived, my mother excused herself to the restroom. David squeezed my hand. "Are you okay?" I nodded. "I'm fine, but I should check on her." I found her in the restroom, standing before the mirror, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She stiffened when she saw me. "Come to gloat?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual edge. "No," I said softly. "I came to see if you're okay." She laughed bitterly. "Why wouldn't I be? My daughter just humiliated me in front of our entire family." I leaned against the counter beside her. "That wasn't my intention. But you've been diminishing me my entire life, Mother. Did you think I would never stand up for myself?" She looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time. "I pushed you because I wanted you to be strong," she said. "The world is cruel to women who show weakness. There's a difference between pushing someone to be their best and making them feel like they'll never be good enough," I replied. She turned back to the mirror, fixing her lipstick with shaking hands. "I never had anyone believe in me the way your husband believes in you, your father." She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. "Well, that's ancient history now." I remembered the stories. How my father had left when I was just a baby, how he'd told my mother she would never succeed without him. The parallels were suddenly striking. "You're not nothing without me, Mother," I said gently. "You never were, and neither am I." A tear slipped down her cheek, leaving a trail of mascara. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a tough teacher," I replied with a small smile. When we returned to the table, the atmosphere had shifted. My mother, composing herself with remarkable speed, addressed the table. "I've just been informed that I have a rather important call from overseas in 15 minutes. We should probably ask for the check." As everyone gathered their things, my mother pulled me aside. "That company of yours," she said, her voice low. "Is it really worth that much?" I nodded. "More, actually, after our last funding round." She straightened my collar, an old habit from my childhood. "And they truly invited you to speak at the summit? That wasn't just your husband trying to—" "It's true," I confirmed. "The invitation came last week." Something flickered across her face. Pride, perhaps, though she quickly masked it. "Well, don't slouch when you're on stage. And make sure your hair is properly styled. First impressions matter." I almost laughed. Some things never change. "Yes, Mother." As we were leaving, David whispered in my ear, "You know, for a moment there I thought your mother might actually apologize." I shook my head. That would be asking for a miracle, but this is progress. Outside the restaurant, as we waited for the valet to bring our car, my mother approached us one last time. "Elizabeth," she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant, Perhaps you could come by for tea this week. I'd like to hear more about this summit of yours." I exchanged a glance with David, who raised an eyebrow in surprise. "I'd like that," I said. As we drove away, David reached over and took my hand. "You realize what just happened, right? Your mother invited you over without being prompted. I think you might have actually impressed her." I gazed out at the city skyline, the buildings gleaming in the afternoon sun. "It's not about impressing her anymore," I said. "It's about finally being seen." That night, as I sat in my home office reviewing quarterly reports, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my mother. "I found a box of your old science fair ribbons. Thought you might want them for your office. They're quite impressive, actually." I stared at the message, reading it over and over. Then I typed back, "I'd love that. Thank you." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an explicit acknowledgement of her behavior. But from my mother, it was something close to a white flag, a small step toward healing a lifetime of wounds. As I placed my phone down and returned to my work, I felt lighter somehow. The shadow of my mother's disapproval, which had followed me for so long, seemed to have receded, if only slightly. And in its place was something new, not quite approval but recognition. Finally, she saw me. And that, I realized, was enough for now. The week following the brunch was unusually busy. Our European expansion was in full swing, and I found myself in back-to-back meetings with investors, partners, and our international team. The promised tea with my mother was postponed twice, once by her, once by me, until finally we settled on Friday afternoon. I arrived at her Upper East Side apartment at precisely 3 p.m., a sleek portfolio tucked under my arm. It contained the presentation I was preparing for the summit, along with our latest press coverage. A peace offering of sorts, or perhaps a final piece of evidence. Her doorman, Hector, greeted me with a warm smile. "Ms. Carter, so good to see you. Your mother mentioned you'd be coming." That was new. Usually my visits were treated as impromptu disturbances, never planned events worth mentioning. My mother opened the door before I could knock, dressed impeccably as always in a cashmere sweater and tailored pants. "You're punctual. Good." She stepped aside to let me in. "I've prepared Earl Grey. Still your favorite?" I nodded, surprised she remembered. "Yes, thank you." Her apartment was exactly as I remembered, meticulously decorated with not a cushion out of place. Family photos lined the hallway, most featuring my mother at various social events. I noticed with a pang that the only photos of me were formal portraits from school, none more recent than my college graduation. We settled in her living room, where a silver tea service awaited on the coffee table. As she poured, I noticed a slight tremor in her hands. "Are you well, Mother?" I asked. She dismissed my concern with a wave. "Just age catching up. Nothing serious." She handed me a delicate porcelain cup. "Now, tell me about this summit. Who else is speaking?" I took a sip of tea, gathering my thoughts. Well, the keynote is being delivered by Naomi Chen. She's the pioneer behind quantum computing at MIT. There's also Martin Weber from the European Innovation Council and Dr. Keisha Williams, who's doing groundbreaking work in AI ethics. Impressive company, my mother remarked, her tone neutral. And what exactly will you be speaking about? I placed my cup down and leaned forward slightly. Our integrated platform that helps companies transition to sustainable technologies without sacrificing efficiency. We've managed to reduce carbon footprints while actually increasing productivity. My mother's eyebrow arched slightly, her version of showing interest. And this was your idea, this platform? The core concept, yes, but my team refined it, made it better. I hesitated, then added, that's what good leadership is about, recognizing that no one succeeds alone. She studied me over the rim of her teacup. Your father used to say something similar. The mention of my father startled me. He was rarely referenced in our conversations. Did he? She nodded, setting her cup down with a soft clink. Before everything changed, he was quite the visionary, always talking about collaborative innovation, about lifting others up. Her mouth tightened. Of course, that philosophy didn't extend to his family. I remained silent, afraid that any response might close this rare window into my father's life and my mother's pain. He left us for his 23-year-old assistant, she continued, her voice flat. Said I was stifling his potential, that I was too controlling, too critical. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her pants. When he left, I promised myself two things: that I would never depend on anyone again, and that I would make sure you were strong enough to stand on your own. The pieces began to fall into place, her relentless pushing, her dismissal of my achievements, her suspicion of David's support. It wasn't just about making me stronger. It was about preparing me for what she saw as inevitable betrayal. Mother, I said gently, not everyone leaves. She gave me a look that was almost pitying. Don't be naive, Elizabeth. Everyone leaves eventually. The trick is to ensure you're not destroyed when they do. That's a lonely way to live. It's a realistic way to live, she countered. Then with a slight softening of her expression, she added, though I admit your David seems different. 10 years and he still looks at you like you hung the moon. I smiled. He's my biggest supporter. Yes, well. She cleared her throat. I believe I promised to show you something. She rose and disappeared into her study, returning moments later with a cardboard box. I found these while reorganizing last month. She placed the box on the coffee table and opened it. Inside were dozens of ribbons, certificates, and newspaper clippings, a meticulous archive of every academic and extracurricular achievement from my childhood and adolescence. I picked up a faded blue ribbon. First place, Regional Science Fair 2002, I read aloud. I didn't know you kept all these. Of course I kept them, she said, as if it were obvious. You were exceptional. Even as a child, you had a mind like no other. I stared at her, trying to reconcile this statement with the woman who had spent years telling me I wasn't good enough. You never said that. Not once. She frowned. I must have. No, Mother, you didn't. She looked genuinely perplexed. Well, I certainly thought it. Everyone did. Your teachers were always calling, telling me you were gifted, that you needed special enrichment. I sifted through the box, finding newspaper clippings about science competitions I'd won, a certificate from NASA's Young Engineers program, letters of recommendation from professors, all carefully preserved. If you were so proud of me, why did you constantly criticize everything I did? She sighed, a sound heavy with years of justification. I told you, the world is cruel to women who aren't exceptional. I had to push you, to prepare you. Praise makes people complacent. Or it gives them confidence, I countered. She reached into the box and pulled out a photograph I'd never seen before, me at about 7 years old, holding up a rudimentary circuit board, my face alight with pride. You never needed confidence, Elizabeth. You needed armor. The statement hung between us, revealing in its simplicity the fundamental difference in our worldviews. Where I saw collaboration and trust as strengths, she saw them as vulnerabilities. I brought something for you too, I said, opening my portfolio. I pulled out a glossy magazine, the latest issue of Forbes, with my company featured in a spread about innovative women-led businesses. Page 37. She took the magazine, her expression carefully neutral as she turned to the article. I watched her eyes move across the page, lingering on the photographs of our headquarters, our team, and finally, a full-page portrait of me in my office. Her fingers traced the headline, Elizabeth Carter, Redefining Leadership in Tech. For a moment, her mask slipped, and I glimpsed something that looked almost like awe. They interviewed 20 of my employees, I explained. From entry-level to senior management, asked them what makes our company different. I pointed to a pull quote near the bottom of the page. This was the consensus. She read it aloud, her voice unusually soft. Working with Elizabeth isn't about proving yourself to her, it's about discovering what you're capable of. She doesn't demand perfection, she inspires growth. Our eyes met, and for the first time in my life, I saw the glimmer of tears in hers. The silence that followed felt different from any we had shared before, not tense or hostile, but contemplative. My mother closed the magazine carefully, her fingers lingering on the cover. You've become quite the leader, she finally said, her voice measured. A different kind than I was, certainly. Different doesn't mean better or worse, I offered. Just different. She gave me a look that suggested she didn't quite believe that, but she didn't argue. Instead, she rose and walked to the large window overlooking Central Park. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the greenery. Your father called me last month, she said abruptly. I nearly dropped my teacup. What? After all these years? She nodded, still gazing out the window. His third wife left him, younger than the assistant, if you can believe it. He's alone now, running a struggling consulting firm in Phoenix. She turned to face me. He asked about you. Said he saw your picture in a business journal. My throat tightened. I had no memories of my father, only stories, most of them tainted by my mother's bitterness. What did you tell him? The truth. That you're extraordinary, that you built something remarkable without any help from him. A small, satisfied smile played at her lips. I may have mentioned the summit and the Forbes feature. I couldn't help but laugh. You were bragging about me? Stating facts, she corrected, but her expression softened. Though yes, I suppose there was a certain satisfaction in detailing your accomplishments. She returned to her seat, smoothing her pants again, a nervous habit I'd noticed over the years. He wants to see you. I told him that was entirely your decision. The revelation left me reeling. My father, this mythical figure whose abandonment had shaped so much of my childhood, suddenly wanted to re-enter my life. I don't know how I feel about that. You don't have to decide now, my mother said, or ever for that matter. You owe him nothing. I studied her face. This woman who had raised me alone, who had pushed me relentlessly, whose approval I had craved for as long as I could remember. For the first time, I saw her not as my critical mother, but as a woman who had been deeply wounded and had done her best with the tools she had. What would you do if you were me? I asked. She seemed surprised by the question. My opinion hardly matters in this. It matters to me. She considered for a moment. I think I would hear what he has to say. Not for his sake, But for yours, closure can be valuable. She hesitated, then added, "But I would not go alone." "You mean take David?" "Yes." She straightened a spoon that was already perfectly aligned with its saucer. "He seems to be a good judge of character." Coming from my mother, this was high praise indeed. "I'll think about it," I promised. She nodded, then returned to the box of memorabilia. "There's something else in here I wanted to show you." She pulled out a yellowed envelope. "This came for you during your senior year of high school, from MIT." I frowned. "I never saw this." "No," she admitted. "You didn't." She handed me the envelope. Inside was a letter inviting me to participate in a special summer program for exceptional young women in STEM, a program that could have led to a full scholarship. "Why did you keep this from me?" I asked, anger flaring. "Because you had already been accepted to Harvard," she replied calmly. "On a partial scholarship, yes, but Harvard nonetheless. MIT was less prestigious." "That wasn't your decision to make," I said, my voice tight. "No, it wasn't," she agreed, surprising me. "It was one of many mistakes I made, believing I knew what was best for you." She met my gaze directly. "I'm not good at apologies, Elizabeth, but I am sorry for that, and for other things, perhaps." It wasn't the sweeping acknowledgement of wrongdoing I might have once craved, but from my mother, it was monumental. And strangely, I found it was enough. "Thank you," I said simply. She nodded once, decisively, as if closing a difficult negotiation. "Now, about this summit. What will you wear? Because if you're thinking of that navy suit with the pinstripes, I must object. It does nothing for your complexion." I laughed, the tension broken. Some things truly never changed. "Actually, David suggested the red dress from the charity gala last fall." "The Valentino?" She looked impressed. "Your husband has better taste than I gave him credit for. Yes, that would be appropriate. Bold, but not ostentatious." We spent the next hour discussing the summit, my speech, the European expansion. She listened more than she spoke, asking thoughtful questions that revealed a genuine interest in my work. When she did offer suggestions, they were presented as options rather than directives, a subtle but significant shift. As I prepared to leave, she walked me to the door, pausing at the hallway of photographs. "These need updating," she said, gesturing to the outdated images. "Perhaps you could send me some recent ones, of you and David, and your team, if you like." "I'd be happy to," I said, touched by the request. At the door, she did something she hadn't done in years. She hugged me. It was brief and slightly awkward, but sincere. "I'm proud of you, Elizabeth," she said quietly. "I should have said that more often." The words I had longed to hear for decades finally spoken aloud. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. "Thank you, Mother." As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from David. "How did it go? Do I need to send a rescue party?" I smiled and typed back, "Actually, it went well. Really well. I think something's changed." His response came immediately. "Miracle alert! Heading to buy lottery tickets now." I laughed, slipping into the driver's seat. As I started the engine, another text came through, this one from my mother. "The box of ribbons is yours to take next time. Your office could use some personal touches." 2 days later, a deliveryman arrived at our home with a carefully wrapped package. Inside was a silver frame containing the photograph of 7-year-old me with my circuit board. Attached was a note in my mother's elegant handwriting. "For your office, a reminder of where you started." I placed it on my desk at work, next to my computer. A reminder not just of where I started, but of how far I'd come, both professionally and personally. The following week, as I stood on the stage at the Global Tech Summit, I spotted my mother in the audience, seated beside David. She sat straight-backed and attentive, nodding slightly as I spoke about ethical innovation and collaborative leadership. When the applause came at the end of my speech, I saw her clapping with genuine enthusiasm, a proud smile on her face. Later at the reception, I overheard her speaking to the CEO of a major tech corporation. "My daughter," she was saying, "has always had exceptional vision. Even as a child, she saw possibilities others missed." The CEO nodded. "You must be very proud." "I am," my mother replied without hesitation, though I can hardly take credit for her success. Elizabeth forged her own path. She glanced over and caught me listening. Instead of embarrassment, she offered a small, conspiratorial smile. She always was stubborn that way. As David joined us, placing a protective arm around my waist, I realized that while my mother and I would never have the warm, effusive relationship depicted in greeting cards, we had found something perhaps more valuable: mutual respect. The shadow of her disapproval had lifted, replaced by recognition of who I truly was, not who she had wanted me to be. And in that recognition was a kind of freedom I had never known before, the freedom to be both her daughter and entirely my own person. That night, as David and I drove home from the reception, I finally made my decision about my father. "I'm going to meet him," I said, "but not alone." David squeezed my hand. "I'll be right there with you." I nodded, watching the city lights blur past the window. "You know, for years, I thought success would mean finally proving my worth to my mother. But that's not it at all." "What is it then?" David asked. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From the little girl with the circuit board to the CEO addressing industry leaders, from the daughter desperate for approval to the woman secure in her own accomplishments. "Success," I said slowly, "is building something meaningful, something that lifts others up, and along the way discovering that you were always enough, even when you couldn't see it yourself." David smiled. "That sounds about right." As we pulled into our driveway, my phone lit up with a text message from my mother. "You were magnificent today. Your father would have been proud. I know I am." I read it twice, savoring each word. Then I typed a simple reply. "Thank you for being there." And for the first time in my life, those words held no hidden plea for acceptance, no desperate need for validation. They were simply the truth, an acknowledgement of a new chapter in our complicated story. A chapter where we could both finally see each other clearly, without the distorting lens of expectation or resentment. The shadow had lifted, and in its place was something unexpected and precious: the beginning of healing.